Well, good morning, Avonhurst. Welcome back to another one of our online gatherings. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. My name's Brad Thomas. I'm the lead pastor here. I want to let you know you being with us, joining with us this morning, it's an answer to our prayer. Our mission as a church is we are disciples making disciples. That is, we're people that have had our lives changed by Jesus, and we want to introduce you to him and come alongside you in your journey of getting to know him better. But we can't do that if we don't know who you are. So if this is your first time, take a moment, text the word welcome to the number 306-700-0041. Again, that's 306-700-0041. What's going to happen when you do that is a link's going to pop up on your phone. Click that link, fill out the information. Just going to ask for your name and a little bit of basic information just so that we can get to know you, be in contact with you. And we're also going to send you a free Tim Hortons gift card just to say welcome to the family. We're so glad that you joined us today. We're going to get into some worship and we're going to get into the word. Before we do that, let's open in a word of prayer. Lord, I thank you so much for each and every person who has joined us today. Thank you for just this opportunity to encounter you, to be changed by you, to know you more. I pray that that's exactly what we do. We would encounter you in a very real, powerful way, that you by your Spirit would do a work in us where we would think more like you, speak more like you, love more like you. And I pray that as we see you and get to know you better, Lord, that we would leave this time together changed by you. May you be glorified in everything that's said and done in Jesus' precious name. Amen.
The weapon may be formed, but it won't prosper. And when the darkness falls, it won't prevail. 'Cause the God I serve knows only how to triumph. My God will never fail. Oh, my God will never fail. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. Yeah. There's power in the mighty name of Jesus, and every war he wages he will win. So I'm not backing down from any giants, 'cause I know how this story ends. Yes, I know how this story ends. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. Oh. You take what the enemy meant for evil, and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. You take what the enemy meant for evil, and you turn it for good. you turn it for good. You take what the enemy meant for evil, and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. You take what the enemy meant for evil, and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. You take what the enemy meant for evil, and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. You take what the enemy meant for evil, and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. Sing it out. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. Yeah, for the battle belongs to you, Lord. You take what the enemy meant for evil, and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. You take what the enemy meant for evil, and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. You always finish what you start. You always finish what you start. Yeah. What you have grown into a garden, you planted in the dark. You always finish what you start. Good things just take a little time. Yeah. Good things just take a little time, yes. But your hands are working in the soil and bringing me to life. Good things just take a little time, yeah. I know I will trust you in the famine. I will bless you in the feast. When I'm standing in your victory, when I'm on my knees, I will praise you with the rising and the setting sun. You're gonna catch me singing when the springtime comes. This story has an empty grave. This story has an empty grave, yeah. And Jesus, the process is a mystery, but your promise never fades. This story has an empty grave. So we will be walking through the fire and You've been God for a long time. You're the final word, you're the finish line. Everything's gonna be alright. I know it, 'cause you've been God for a long time. You've been God for a long time. You're the final word, you're the finish line. And everything's gonna be alright. I know it, 'cause you've been God for a long time. Oh yeah, you've been God for a long time. You're the final word, you're the finish line. And everything's gonna be alright. This I know, 'cause you've been God for a long the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am in, oh, I'm gonna sing of the goodness of God. Oh, I will sing of the goodness of You are good when there's nothing good in me. You are love on display for all to see. You are light when the darkness closes in. You are hope, you have covered all my sin. You are peace when my fear is crippling. You are true, even in my wandering. You are joy, you're the reason that I sing. You are life, in you death has lost its sting. And oh, I'm running to your arms, I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world, forever reign. You are more than my words will ever say. You are Lord, all creation will proclaim. You are here, in your presence I'm made whole. You are God, of all else I'm letting go. And oh, I'm running to your arms, I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world, forever reign. I'm running to your arms, I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world, forever reign. My heart will sing, no other name. Jesus, Jesus. My heart will sing, no other name. Jesus, Jesus. My heart will sing, no other name. Jesus, Jesus. My heart will sing, no other name. Jesus, Jesus. And oh, I'm running to your arms. no other name. Jesus, Jesus, my heart will sing, no other name. Jesus, Jesus.
At this time, we're going to continue with our worship, but rather than worshiping through song, we're going to worship with our generosity and our giving. At Avonhurst, we don't give because we're pressured to religiously. We don't give to earn God's love, favor, or acceptance. Those are things we've been given by the grace of God. We give as an act of worship, and we give knowing that as we sow into the kingdom of God, lives are transformed and changed, and we want to invest in things that are eternal, not just things that are temporary. And so if you want to give to the ministry at Avonhurst, the easiest way to do that right now is by e-transfer. You can give all gifts to Avonhurst Church at sasktel.net. You can also give on our app, bottom right corner, there's a little give button. You can also give in person Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to noon, using the debit machine here. You can also set up auto give by just emailing Avonhurst Church at sasktel.net.
Well, hello once again, Avonhurst Church. It is my incredible honor to get to share once again in our most recent series, Man of Many Names. If you don't know me, my name is Jacob Miller. I'm the Avonhurst Youth and Young Adults pastor. And as Pastor Brad Thomas has been away, I've been given the opportunity to continue the series, Man of Many Names, where we've been looking at the many names, the many characteristics of God. Not names and characteristics that are meant to confuse us, but meant to, in fact, bring us closer to Him. He is such a diverse and loving Father that we have all of these names that we may understand Him better, be drawn nearer to Him, and have a deeper relationship with Him because of it. And so we invite you today, as you join us, to learn these characteristics and hopefully be drawn near to Him as well. I'm incredibly excited as well because I had the opportunity last week to share the first part of these 2 weeks where I'm sharing, looking at the story of King David, a man known for being near to God's own heart, who understood God on a special level, who had his own personal names that we see him refer to God as. And the first was Jehovah Ra'ah. We were looking at that shepherd heart of God that David understood, because he was also a shepherd. He, the youngest of his family, had to go be a lowly shepherd, but in it learned how great and big God's heart is. In the same way, God protects those sheep and guides them and brings them to places of true rest. David understood that as well. He got to see it firsthand in his own years as a shepherd. But he also saw the hard and brutal side of being a shepherd. We're going to read later on how David had to fight tooth and nail to protect his sheep. He had to fight lions and bears, and he won. But he understood that it was by the grace of God. And in the same way, as we lost sheep face the struggles of this world, David saw how God, as that shepherd, was fighting for us. He understood him as more than just a shepherd on the hills, but as a king, a warrior, a champion on the battlefield. And for this reason, we're going to see how David calls God Jehovah Tsaba. Jehovah Tsaba means the Lord of hosts. Now that doesn't mean anything about hostess snack cakes or hosting a nice fancy dinner. The Lord of hosts is like the Lord of armies, the Lord, the commander of Israel, the Lord who fights for us, God who fights for you and for me. Now, I find that kind of interesting, this idea of the God who fights for us, because if you're anything like me, that is sorely needed. Not even just in a spiritual sense. Have you ever been in a fight? I personally haven't been. I'm sure a lot of you have maybe, been able to hold your own in a tussle, but I grew up as, a good kid, but a scared kid. So I was really the perfect storm, the perfect balance of the kind of kid who would run from a fight, in that fight or flight mentality. I'm not the fight, I'm the flight. So I myself don't really have any fighting stories, but my friends were sharing a story once that I found pretty interesting. They were doing something we call a Mainer. I grew up in a small little town, so if you grew up in a small town, you might be familiar with what a Mainer is. It's really this idea of when you're young hooligans with nothing better to do, you walk into town like at midnight or later, and you walk up Main Street and then back down Main Street. And that's it. And there is really no better way to explain how little there is to do in a small town than the fact that this is what we did for fun. And at one point, a group of my friends, some of my older friends' siblings and things like that were together, and they had gone on a walk. They'd gone on one of these manors really late at night. And as they're walking by all these stores, and Subway, movie gallery, all these places shut down and lights turns off, all that there is the street lamps to light the dark main street. And this is a small town. There's really no nightlife. It's quiet. You can hear the crickets. And they're walking down Main Street when they see another group walking directly towards them. And this group is a little intimidating. Even in, a nice little sweet small town, there's still some dangerous things that can happen. There's still sometimes some hooligans up to no good. And this group is walking towards them, this gang really, in their baggy sweaters and their hoodie over their head, drawn up, shadow covering their face, is just kind of swaggering towards them in the dark. And the group of friends made a smart decision. They crossed to the other side of the street. They had the flight mentality. If a fight is coming, we just do our best to avoid it. But there was no avoiding the coming battle. As they crossed the street, this gang coming towards them crossed as well, proving that they had put their target, they had their sights set on my group of friends, and that this war was coming. And at this point, they were too close. There was nowhere to go. There was nothing to do. To turn and run would get them nowhere. And they were almost frozen in this moment, trying to decide, what are we going to do as this group approaches us? Now, if it was me, I would not be prepared for the fight. I'm not. I have no fighting skills. I'm more of a flight kind of person. I'm the one who would try to work out the differences with words. I don't know how to hold my own. I would not have survived such a battle that was coming. So others in the group were big, strong people, and they were probably bracing themselves and getting ready to try to hold their own, wondering if they'd even survive the night. Others might have been a bit more of the hide behind the big people. That's a little bit sometimes more my mindset. But even as they're thinking this and preparing for how do we survive this battle in the dark, the person in the front of this gang coming towards them took his hood off and just yelled, "Dance battle, yo!" And he just starts busting a move and dancing right there on the sidewalk. And they realized something. This intimidating group knew that they were intimidating, and they played right into it for the sake of this joke as they just dance battled my friends right there on the street. And now it's one of their favorite memories. They joke about it all the time. But they are so thankful, not just for the dance battle, they're thankful for the fact that it was nothing worse. And so I kind of got to ask you that question too. Are you ready for a battle? Or would you be the one to hide behind our big, strong God as he does the fighting for us? Because some of us hear this, Jehovah, Tsaba, this Lord of hosts, Lord of armies, the God who fights for us. And we have this idea that we're just the sheep that we talked about last week, who we just blindly walk around doing our own thing as God fights off the bears and the lions. But as we said last week, when we ended, we talked about how God is teaching us to rest properly in his presence so that we are prepared for the coming battle, like a lion crouching before the pounce. In the same way, we have sometimes the wrong idea of the God who fights for us. It's not just that he fights for us, it's that he commands us to fight as well. I was looking in Joshua chapter 5, 13 to 15, that Joshua, as he was near Jericho, looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" "Neither," he replied, "but as commander of the army of the Lord I have now come." Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. To clarify, the man Joshua sees is no mere man. In the same way that Jesus walked this earth in human flesh, and many came across him and knew this man is the Messiah, the Son of God. In the same way, Joshua sees this man and knows this isn't just some warrior who's strayed away from his group. God is revealing himself to me as a warrior. And so he asks in desperation, "Are you for us or are you for our enemies? I need to know in this coming battle, will you be on our side, God, or are you against us?" And through this warrior, God communicates, it's not about, am I for you? It's not, am I fighting the battle for you? It's, I'm the commander of this army. Are you for me? Are you with me? Are you going to fight alongside me? And as we look at how David uses the name Jehovah Tsaba, we understand that David was never going to hide behind a big God and push him into the battle. David was ready to lead the charge if God commanded him. So I invite you today to read with me as we jump into 1 Samuel chapter 17, starting in verse 2. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with the valley between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span, about 9 feet 9 inches. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels, about 125 pounds. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels, about 15 pounds. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistines said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time he was very old. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. Now Jesse said to his son David, "Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are and bring back some assurance from them. They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines." So early in the morning, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd, loaded up and set out as Jesse has directed. I want to take a moment to stop right there. This shepherd, David, leaves to go see this army that is quaking in their boots, commanded by God to fight, but is too afraid to. They've kind of forgotten God. One might say this entire army, this entire nation of Israel in this moment is kind of like that lost sheep who's wandered far away from the shepherd God. And so now this young shepherd boy David is sent to go to them. Kind of reminds you a little bit, like we said last week, that shepherd who goes after the one lost sheep. He goes on to say, he reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies. He ran to the battle lines and asked his brothers how they were. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance. And David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. Now the Israelites had been saying, "Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel." David asked the men standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God, Jehovah Tsaba?" They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, "This is what will be done for the man who kills him." When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. Now what have I done?" said David. "Can't I even speak?" He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent to him. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul replied, You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it. I struck it and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God, Jehovah Tsaba. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of the Philistine." Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around, because he was not used to them. "I cannot go in these," he said to Saul, "because I'm not used to them." So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand. He chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied, Jehovah Tsaba. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching in his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. With a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. I think by now most of us have probably heard the story of David and Goliath, an amazing story of a man who stands up and fights for God. And that's what I want to talk about today, this idea of Jehovah Tsaba. I want to find out how we can go from just thinking God fights for me and I don't do anything, to standing like David and understanding he's the commander of the army who commands me to step forward boldly and fight, knowing that it is through his power and strength that victory is assured. So how do we do that today? I mean, we still face battles all the time. It might not be as physical as David or these other warriors throughout the Old Testament like Joshua. Instead, it might be something more of a spiritual battle. But I still think the way God worked through these judges, these warriors, these kings, can teach us how we today can continually stand up and fight, prepared by our Savior to fight a coming battle. And one of the very first things is something that David says as he talks with Saul. So again, if you're taking notes, write down lesson 1, remember. If we look at David, we see that as he comes forward to Saul and Saul questions, how will you fight Goliath? David talks about his experience as a shepherd. He talks about how he fought lions and bears to protect the sheep. And this wasn't just some easy, simple story like, oh yeah, we all fight lions and bears, no problem. Nor was this just a story where he thought he was amazing and he was pumping himself up, saying, I can fight lions and bears. Let's see you do that, Saul. Instead, this passage is surrounded by how David is explaining the might of God. And the passage ends with him explaining all of this is through God's power. In the same way that I was delivered by God from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, I will find victory over the Philistine by the power of God. He remembers what God has done in the past, the miracles that God has performed before, the ways that God has empowered him before, and he stands firmly upon that. And we need to do the same. When we face a battle, God knows when our fear is holding us back and when the courage of what he has done is propelling us forward. As I was thinking through kind of the points in David's story, another story came up to me as well. Another one of my favorite Old Testament people, like Joshua, was a judge that God chose named Gideon. And one of a well-known Gideon story is similar to this, where God's people are having to face and fight a warring nation, and they're afraid. They've had many victories before, but they quickly and easily forget them. This is honestly Israel's history, is forgetting things. And this kept happening. Israel would forget what God has done, and they would fall apart and then have to be restored to God. And God would give them great victories again. And then they'd forget again. And very often the reason was because they would make this really kind of annoying excuse. And eventually they'd claim that they were the reason for the victory and not God, which means we don't need him at all. And so we get to the same situation with David as the king and the army have all forgotten God, and they run away in fear from this Goliath. And we also get to this story with Gideon. The army of Israel, as always, fighting battles and forgetting that it's because of God. And so we look at Gideon in Judges chapter 7, verses 1 to 3. It said, "Early in the morning, Gideon and all his men camped at the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. The Lord said to Gideon, 'You have too many men. You have too many men to fight this coming battle. I cannot deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel would boast against me. My own strength has saved me,' they'll say. Now announce to the army, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead." So 22,000 men left, while only 10,000 remained. We see that God just simply says, anyone who's afraid of the coming battle. See, in this point, they had a huge army, probably just enough to defeat the Midianites, just enough to assure victory against their enemy. And they say, despite that, it's still a war and some will die. If you're afraid, leave. And 22,000 leave, leaving only 10,000 to fight. Only 10,000 who actually had a heart, God knew, to remember him. A heart to hopefully actually be able to recognize that, hey, God has won victories in the past. He's going to win them again. I'm not afraid. I'm willing to fight. We need to be able to do the same thing. When spiritual battles come, when fight is assured, when that gang is walking down our spiritual, dark, shadowed alleys, are we prepared? Are we ready to fight? Would you remind yourself of all that God has done for you, all of the victories that he has given you, the miracles he has performed in your life? It is so easy for us just to throw things off saying, that was just coincidence. But the reality is God is performing miracles around you all the time. And if you genuinely struggle to remember one, a gift and a victory he's given you, open the Bible and read the way his son, Jesus Christ, was sacrificed on the cross for you. When he rose again and defeated our enemy, that was the ultimate victory. That was the ultimate miracle. If you have nothing else, would you fall back on that when the battles are coming and remind yourself that our God is bigger? And then see how he's calling you. That brings us to our second point. Again, if you're taking notes, you can write down lesson 2, refresh. I like this moment as David convinces the king that he is called by God, that God has assured victory against even lions and bears, so this Philistine, this giant, is going to be no issue. The king gives in. Saul says, all right, well, let's get you ready. And they put helmet and armor and all of this man-made protection on him, because what he sees is this little boy who's going to get cut in half in less than a second. So he's protecting him with everything he can think of. But as he powers it on, as he puts these heavy, burdensome armor on to David, David says, I can't walk with this stuff on. I'm uncomfortable in this. I can't fight the battle that's to come wearing all of this armor. We even maybe see a little bit of that Gideon story. David saying, with all of this on, you'll think that I was protected by man-made things. You'll think that it's not God who wins the war. You're basically kind of showing that you don't trust God enough for me to go out there without these burdensome armors on. Instead, I would rather trust God. I want to go to God. I want to take these burdens off and see where he sends me. And he starts to remember that shepherding, his own experience. He remembers taking those sheep. After fighting the bears and the lions, he would take them to rest. He'd take them to those green pastures and those still waters. And he thought about those still waters, those streams, that place of true rest and refreshment for the sheep, in the same way as a place that would have been life-giving to him. And he goes to the water, and at the stream, he finds smooth stones. And he takes 5 of them, and he puts them in his pouch, and he takes those to fight Goliath. And I really like this image of him going to the water because it's also an important image to us. Water has become this great idea of how we come to God, be immersed in the presence of God, and be refreshed by that life-giving flow of God. You see that we have that in baptisms as people are baptized and risen back into a new life. We sing songs about come to the river. I love this idea of water, especially I just love swimming and water in general. So the idea of that being this image of coming and being refreshed by God is beautiful. And David understood that possibly as he came down to this river, obeying God and grabbing these stones. But we also kind of get to see that a little bit in the Gideon story once again. Open up again to Judges chapter 7, looking at verses 4 to 8. But the Lord said to Gideon, there are still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will thin them out for you there. If I say this one shall go with you, he shall go. But if I say this one shall not go with you, he shall not go. So Gideon took the men down to the water. There the Lord told him, separate those who lap the water with their tongues as a dog laps from those who kneel down to drink. 300 of them drank from cupped hands, lapping like dogs. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. The Lord said to Gideon, with the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home. So Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites home, but kept the 300 who took over the provisions and trumpets and of the others. I like this idea again, that God sends them to go down to the river. Again, let's take this moment to look at the water, to look at the river, and recognize it as come to the presence of God. And this idea of who lapped from the water like a dog and who knelt at the water, being this idea of God starting to measure who actually takes on the presence of God, who actually dives into the presence of God, and who here isn't. And this story was always kind of a weird one for me. When I read that sentence of separate the ones who lapped like dogs, I would have assumed that those are the ones getting kicked out of the army. Those are the ones we don't want. But it turns out those are the ones that God chooses to keep, those 300 men who apparently lap like dogs. And a lot of people have read this and been confused. Furthermore, they've been confused because this idea of lapping like dogs is the idea of scooping up this water and drinking it with their mouth, with their tongue, like how a dog drinks, obviously not using a cup. And so you ask this question, so were the other people using a cup? No, it says they knelt down and went to the water. In the end, historians who have looked over the story are confused by the fact that they drank in pretty well the same way. They both took up water, whether drinking from the stream or scooping in their hands, and they drank it like a dog. So what's the real difference between these two groups of people drinking water from the stream? There's really only one other defining factor. It says that the men who were not included, thousands of men who were not included in the final warrior battle, were the ones who knelt down. And in this time, kneeling was seen in one specific place. Those who knelt very well might have pointed to those who most commonly were used to this position of lowering themselves, because that's how they knelt before idols. That's how they knelt before false gods. These were the ones who spent their time worshiping. As they came to this river, they would showing that they preferred to bow down before a false god, something that could not assure them victory. And these other men, these ones who drank like dogs, these ones who weren't kneeling, what were they doing? Well, we find that they were crouching, still lowering themselves to water, still nearing themselves to something that we hope would represent this worship, this presence of God, but they crouched. They didn't let themselves be eased into this lazy kneeling, laying down, or anything like that. They let themselves be in a position of preparedness. They weren't just resting, expecting God to fight the battle. They rested in a way that was equally ready to jump up and fight if the ambush were to come behind them. And these are the men that God chooses, not those who take on the burdens of sin, not those who take on the lies of the enemy, not those who take on human assurances and protection. Instead, it's those who just sit in the presence of God, ready to pounce like lions in a moment's notice if He commands them. And I hope that this would be the same for us, that we would have a right understanding of refreshment, not just remembering what God has done in the past, but that we would sit in His presence and rest, like we talked about last week with the sheep. We talked about how I went to a retreat and I listened to a speaker, a Pauline Dirksen, who explained that rest and work are not meant to be separate. As I was thinking about that quote and talking about us understanding a proper version of rest, where God is using it to prepare us for the battle, my sister-in-law Mandy sent me this quote that she had read that she felt connected with last week's sermon quite a bit. It says, "Rest brings renewed energy to work, and it is given to God's followers as a divine gift. In the kingdom of God, work and rest are in harmony, and they should not be viewed as two competing options." Again, rest brings renewed energy to work. God is not looking to just give us a break or an escape from all that he is calling us to, nor do we have an escape from the enemy who will continually be hounding us. So if we choose to be like the men who choose to lay down, to kneel, to rest, who choose to go and worship idols, thinking that it will assure them victories when they are unsure of what God will do, we're going to fall apart. We're going to have that warring life that just doesn't fit together. But instead, if we can have this idea that God rests us and prepares us, he brings us to those green pastures, those still waters, to prepare us for the battle ahead, and then actually listen as he calls us into the work, into the battle, then we will truly understand what it means to be refreshed. Not just rested so as to feel free, but to be refreshed so as to head back into the fray prepared. And finally, if we are prepared, if we fully trust God as that army of Gideons did, will we, lesson 3, roar. Again, if you're taking notes, write down lesson 3, roar. I want to start as we look at this point, this idea of this roar, this battle cry, looking just at Judges 7, the end of this story. We see that Gideon has whittled his army down to 300 in obedience to God, and now he's going to have to go face thousands of Midianites that will surely demolish them, if not for the saving grace of God. And so God does something. He says, "Prepare your army, bring them up to where the battlefield will be. And in the dark of night while the army is sleeping, if you are still afraid, I invite you to go down among the army, sneak in amongst the tents, and just listen to what they have to say." And as Gideon goes down, he hears from some of the tents, a few of the soldiers have woken up from nightmares. And they're explaining these dreams of things that are coming and crashing through the Midianite army, destroying all of them. And they, like a prophecy, explain what that dream means. And they say, surely this means that Gideon and his army are going to decimate us tomorrow. God has stricken a fear into the enemy that blinds them to the reality of how the Israelites are going to fight. And so as Gideon goes back up, he obeys God and he calls his army together, and he gives them the remaining torches and trumpets that all the other soldiers had left behind. And he says, in the dark, we will surround the Midianite armies. We will have our torches lit but under jars so they can't see them, and we'll have our trumpets ready. And when I say go, blow your trumpets, smash the jars, and hold your torches high. So that's it, just 300 men with torches and trumpets surround the Midianites' army. And what do we see happen? Verse 19, Gideon and the 100 men with him reached the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just after they had changed the guard. They blew their trumpets, they broke their jars that were in their hands, and the 3 companies blew the trumpets and smashed the jars as well. Grasping the torches in their left hands and holding in their right hands the trumpets they were to blow, they shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." While each man held his position around the camp, all the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. I would have way too much fear to yell, to roar, to shout that battle cry for the glory of God. But these 300 men that God had whittled it down to, he knew that these were the ones who remembered him, who were refreshed by him, and who were ready to follow him into the thickest fray. And here they shout that battle cry. And as they do, it strikes the fear into the enemy, and they run. It even says that in their fear, they start to fight each other because they're so afraid that they're surrounded by an army far greater than just 300. And it's because they're surrounded by a truly great army, the army of God. And so I kind of think back to the story of David. I think back to his experience there as he's removing this armor and going to the water, preparing, listening to God, obeying God, and he steps forward towards Goliath. And Goliath spits in his face. He hates him. He says, "What is this baby-faced little boy really going to do? You really think you're going to beat me?" And he actually starts to point out God. And he starts to say that your God isn't real. Your God is puny. I will defy your God. And David steps up and confronts that. David says, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." David understood that the battle was already the Lord's. He was commanded to fight this battle, so he knew that if he just simply remembered what God had done, he would build up his courage. If he was refreshed in the presence of God, he would see how to fight the battle. And at that point, with that courage and that preparation, all he had left to do was to roar, to shout the battle cry, and to run into the battle, knowing that God would win it. But how do we do that? That seems wild, right? I can't have that kind of courage. I can't assure that God is there. But then we kind of jump back and we look at the story of Joshua once again. Joshua, who saw that man, who saw the presence of God in front of him as this warrior and said, "Are you for me or are you against me?" And God simply said, "I'm here to lead you. I'm here to command. Are you going to follow?" And we see my favorite verse in Joshua 1:9 says, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." This isn't some far distant God, a king on his throne sending his warriors to die in battle. This is the king leading the charge, and he wants you by his side. I hope that's your response. As you face the battles, can you boldly say, "God is for me. God is with me. God has empowered me and has sent me to fight this battle. I will run in roaring." No one can stand against the glory of Jehovah, Tsaba, my God. Father, I thank you so much for the opportunity we've had to come together and to grow and to learn, just to see how you are guiding us and leading us. I pray that we will not just be a church that rests, but a church that is refreshed, reminded of all that you have done, and one that runs forward roaring. Father, I pray that our roar doesn't just stay within these walls, but that it would be seen in the streets of Regina, the streets of your home, wherever you're listening from today. I pray that it would be heard, these glories of God, really just spitting in the face of the enemy, Satan, our adversary, saying, "You've already lost. In the name of my God, I step on you. I put you under my feet. I win this battle because of God's strength." And I pray that anyone else feeling underfoot today would rise up and run right into the arms of God. Father, I pray that you would just bless this family today. In your name we pray. Amen.
Give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord, you give life. Our love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. Oh, so great are you, Lord. It's my breath, it's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. hearts will cry, and these bones will sing.